Born in Lethbridge, or where are you from?
No, I was born just outside of Vancouver, born and raised out there, but moved to Lethbridge 25 years ago, just after my wife and I got married. And we've raised our family here, started businesses here. She's worked almost her entire career at the Lethbridge Regional Hospital in the emergency room. And I've worked predominantly in construction, moving my way through residential, owning my own business, selling my businesses, and now working for a commercial construction company.
So at what point did you say to yourself, I am running and I'm running for the UCP?
The UCP was never in question. I was a Wild Rose member for years and fully support the Conservative movement, both provincially and federally. So that wasn't that much of a decision. In terms of deciding to run myself, it's something I've wanted to do since I was 18. I took economics and politics at high school. So this has been a lifelong dream, but it's taken me 26 years to live my resume. And now being able to have a chance to represent what I believe in for family, what I believe in for small business, this is a great opportunity. And when the two parties came together, I thought that was the best thing to do. I voted for the unification of that. I voted in the leadership election. And now I decided to take my voice and take a lot of people that I know and work with and try to bring that voice to the forefront.
Now, I want to touch on family policy first. That's a big issue right now. And so what are your policies pertaining to to kids, to parents, just the family setting?
So I actually believe that the policies that the UCP has put forward in their policy statement, I believe in those fully. I think they've taken a lot of time, they've gone right to the grassroots, and they've really worked those things through. And there's more issues that they need to address and work through to fully develop that policy, but what they've put out so far I agree with, which is basically standing for strong families, parental rights to know where their children are educated, how they're educated, and be part of their education. There are lots of contentious issues out there right now, and I think government needs to listen to the people and listen to both sides of that. Educators have gone to school, they've been trained, they've been educated in their jobs. They have a professional perspective, and I think we need to get the educators and parents working together instead of pitting them against one another. And that's going to be for the best protection of all children, especially the vulnerable ones.
And I'll dig on that a little bit. So obviously we've seen some issues where educators have been given too much powers and parents too little, and yet it seems, and yet of course, if parents wanted all the power, they wouldn't be sending their kids to school. So take me through what the balance is there for you.
For me personally, the balance is that you have open communication, and you have to have legislation that supports every situation is different. Just doing blanket policy across the board doesn't allow for one situation where the educators may be in the wrong, or a situation on the converse side where maybe the parents are in the wrong. How do you do that with blanket legislation? Every situation is different, and I think that needs to be handled very, very carefully. I've talked to some senior educators in Lethbridge, and they have great policies of taking care of children. They are hands-on in the situation when it's at that school, and they have been trained in the appropriate response for that. So to limit that while they're there hands-on is not effective. Conversely, parents do need to know what's happening with their children, and that needs to be handled very carefully and delicately so that it doesn't influence other kids or impact other children. They're the parents of those children, and they need to be aware of what's going on in that. So that is a difficult balance to strike. But if you don't take the time and talk with the parents and talk with the educators and work this out, you are going to be pitting one against the other, and the one that loses is the children.
So, just to clarify, it sounds like that is still something that you're, I would say, figuring out a little bit more. Is that fair to say?
I'm figuring out, because I haven't been in those sessions in caucus, I haven't been in those sessions in the House, and I haven't actually read the entire legislation myself. And some of that would take a lawyer to explain. But in terms of what I believe that parents are responsible for educating their children. And I believe that children need to be protected, whether that is against parents or whatever. That takes an incredible discernment, and it takes very specific information related to every single instance to determine that. So that I think that I'm settled on those issues, and how to write legislation to cover that would take time.
Okay, well, that's good for that, and so I guess getting into the business side of things, obviously you lean on the side of, low business taxation. Take me into more detail there.
Sure. I think the entrepreneurial spirit of Alberta, this is the strength of Alberta has been the strength of the west of Canada for many, many years. And when there is legislation, particularly like we've had in the last couple of years, that has unintended consequences, that limits that enterprise, that hampers free market, you see what we see now, a faltering economy where we're not growing, where we're not thriving, where we're not innovating, where we're not leading. Alberta for many years was the world leader in all kinds of industry, from oil to farming to healthcare. And I believe that we have the spirit and the small business entrepreneurship to do that again. And that's where I believe government needs to govern by setting minimum thresholds. What are we going to allow? What are we not going to allow? And maximum tolerances, so that we cap that on both ends. That's the role of government. In between, we allow business to grow and thrive and innovate and become world leaders. That's how we did it before, and that's how we'll do it again. And if you have a thriving economy, even more spin-off in the positive is reached by that. People move to Alberta, people purchase land and homes, people build homes, people send their kids to school. You have more of that, not less. And I think it starts with a government that allows free enterprise to get to work, and yet still governs those minimum and maximums, because that's what a government needs to do.
Would you say, and I'm just going to move this a little bit, at this point, would you say in Alberta, government might be too big?
I'm a very fiscally conservative person, and I believe that, yes, government's too big. And you have to be very, very careful how you address that. There are thousands upon thousands of Albertans who are frontline workers, whether you're teachers or nurses or doctors, that are government workers, and they feel threatened by that. And that is not the intent. The intent is, how many people does it take to manage that? How many areas is the government in that could be better served in the private sector? Government tends to continue to grow, and it takes more and more people to feed that. I think there has to be a way of balancing that out. It should grow at a similar rate to private, so we don't disrupt that ratio. Otherwise, we would all end up working for government at some point in time, and that is the drift that we want to be aware of. And when you have a government that continues to grow, how do you fund that? It's taxation on one form or another. So I believe that if I understand the policies of the UCP correctly, we want to trim that back and work that back in an appropriate measure. You can't do it overnight. We want to have balanced budgets, we want to pay off debt and deficit, and we want to have surplus, but that doesn't mean we just slash and burn. We can't do that. It would take measured approach and a lot of collaboration by a lot of people to set out an effective path to reach that goal.
Now let's go into sort of the income tax avenue of things a little bit.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to start with, we're looking at, well, it's sort of income and business. Like, so we're looking at things like, the NDP's minimum wage. We're looking at things like the carbon tax.
Yeah.
Are there any of those policies as you go further down the line that you could find yourself agreeing with, or are you really widely anti-tax?
I would say I am anti-tax in general. Specific measures may at some point be needed. Obviously, sales tax has been talked about for a lot of years, and I hope that we can do everything we can to not have to bring that in Alberta. I disagree with the carbon tax because I don't think it is actually solving the need that it was stated to try to solve. At this point, there's very little, if any, evidence that it's actually reducing the carbon footprint. It is strictly a tax, carbon or not. Minimum wage, I understand that people need a minimum wage to be able to survive and to be able to be part of the society. That's one of the areas where I stated before that it had unintended consequences. Whenever any business owner is forced with an increase, whether it's a material supply cost or a labor supply cost, their output cost goes up. So then they're going to move their prices up. And all those people that you were trying to help are now right back in the square one where they can't afford what they could afford before. So I believe there's more effective methods to help those that need help to be able to survive in our economy and in Alberta. And it doesn't mean that the same measures in Lethbridge would be used in Calgary or Edmonton. Cities vary drastically. And I think we need to have targeted measures for specific places. One of the other unintended consequences of a minimum wage, I have 3 daughters that are just entering the workforce. What it did directly for them is it cut down the amount of hours that they could work. So they saw a reduction in income, not an increase. And they found it harder to get a job. I had a daughter that took her 3 or 4 months to get a job simply because she's on the low end of qualified. She's been at high school. She doesn't have those skills yet. So to enter that market and be paid a higher minimum wage made it really tough because there's only certain jobs that could afford to take her on at that wage. So those are unintended consequences, but again, negatively affect the very people you're trying to help. And I think that takes experience. It takes experience in the business, in the marketplace, to be able to address those. And that's where my life experience, my 26 years as a business owner, as an employee, would help.
Just a couple more questions for you, and I guess I want to make sure I have a good understanding of your, economic policies, which is just a statement of basic free market conservatism. But
yeah.
Of course, the NDP kind of markets itself as we are sort of consumer low-end employee first, whereas I guess those more on the conservative side would say no, we're business owner first because we know that the competition of the free market will make sure that they provide for the consumer and their employees as well. So is that an accurate statement?
I would say that's fairly accurate, yes. I think my position on it is government is meant to govern, and the market is meant to work within that realm. And when those borders cross and you have one going into the other, that's where you have these problems. You either end up with monopolies or you end up with huge companies that rule everything. I think that there's two separate. The government is meant to govern and set those thresholds, and then the market is to operate within that. And when you get crossover of those two things, you end up with problems down the line.
And I think this is my last question. I mean, it kind of depends on what
Sure.
you say, but we have 3 nominees in this race.
Yeah.
Why are you the best one?
I think any of the 3 would be a great choice for Lethbridge East. I think we've got a great range of people to pick from, and my strength, my experience, what I bring is I have been in business for myself and with others for the last 26 years in Lethbridge East. I think I understand what business owners are facing, what the working class is facing, and I want to represent that. And I have a family with 5 children, and I've gone through the education system with them from the very beginning to the university, and I'm part of that, and I feel like having interacted with that as a parent, that I would have a voice there. My wife works in the emergency room at the hospital and has for over 20 years, and those relationships and with doctors, nurses, administrators, frontline staff, we've learned an incredible amount from them, and I would have even further resource by speaking to them even more. I'd like to think that those 26 years of experience matter, that they do represent a majority of Lethbridge East, and I'm hoping that they would identify with me and allow me to be their representative this time.